The F1 Pod on Off the Ball with Chicago Town Pizza.
Formula One?
Yeah, we go to town on it.
Alright, you're very welcome along. It's episode 7 of the F1 Pod on Off the Ball, weekly between now and the end of the season after the race weekends, of course, live on Wednesdays in the F1 Pod podcast feed and the Off the Ball daily podcast feed, wherever you get your podcasts. The F1 Pod on Off the Ball, brought to you by our sponsors, Chicago Town Pizza. Real takeout taste for less with Chicago Town. As always, keep your questions and comments and thoughts myself on Twitter. You'll find me at Shane Hannon 01. I'm delighted to welcome along and welcome back, I guess, for episode 7. We have Bernie Collins, the Formula One pundit, and who's most recently head of race strategy for the Aston Martin Formula One team. And we have Declan Quigley, the motorsport journalist and broadcaster. Bernie and Declan, how are things?
Good, nice to be here.
Cheers. Thanks for hopping on as per usual. We were just saying before we started there, Bernie, you love Hungary and the Hungary ring so much that you're still there.
Yeah, well, it's unfortunate I got here after the race, so it's weird being out of track and just as the pack-up's happening and just as things are starting to sort of be put away and tucked down. But yeah, it's still here. It's a little bit wetter than it was over the race weekend, but still chilling out here.
Is that whole process, because I haven't been at a Grand Prix before, the whole process of packing things away, taking things off, I'm sure the teams have it down to a T now, but I mean, it's a huge undertaking at the same time. The people maybe don't realize the scale of the work that goes on behind the scenes to get all the equipment to location.
Yeah, it's definitely, if you look at think of things like the pit wall, the garage, the trucks behind, all of that, the teams will have taken down overnight after the race. So, from the end of the race to the pack up being complete from a team side, there's probably another 8 or 9 hours work there and taking it all. And they have it, they're pretty good at it now these days. They getting it all pretty quickly, put away all the offices and stuff. And then that'll all have been transited to Spa, and then today, Wednesday, for the Spa weekend, that'll all be getting set up again. So the pack up that's still happening here is sort of the bits that are left behind. So the paddock club and some of the grandstands, ticket offices, all of the stuff that's sort of circuit specific. But the teams are actually cleared out pretty quickly after the race. Even the big, Red Bull motorhome that we see that's really huge, they do it pretty quickly.
Back in the old days at Monza, the breakdown began as the cars went out on their last lap, because the fans, the Tifosi, would sort of storm the barriers, race across the track the minute the cars came across the finish line. And this is right up into the Schumacher era. And so they'd be out with cranking it and breaking down the pit wall as quick as they could, because everything would just suddenly disappear to be just stripped bare. And I remember once, it was almost like, the fall of Saigon or something, sliding in under a garage door that was coming down, because they were sort of pulling down the shutters as quick as they could, because, it was just nuts. It was bananas. And these days they have much higher fences, so it's a little bit safer. Yeah.
It's crazy. It's mental, the stuff that people, they all want their little piece, especially the Tifosi. I suppose that they're a very fervent support, let's just say, for sure. You did mention Spa there, Bernie, and we will get to that, I suppose, before the end of the podcast. The Belgian Grand Prix this weekend, preceding the 4-week summer break. Declan, that's one. Spa was one for me that was always top of my list, unfortunately, and I always get slagged for bringing this up all the time. The Spa Grand Prix I went to was the one a couple of years ago when the rain played havoc and the half points were handed out, so it wasn't exactly the best Spa Grand Prix to go to. But
it always rains at Spa, so
it does.
Pick one out, yeah.
Well, that's why I picked it, to be honest. I was like, Spa will be brilliant. It always rains, so it'll be a great race. But yeah, maybe we didn't barter for the amount of rain we had. Have you had a favorite Grand Prix location? Has there always been a place that has held the most, I guess, for you?
I always used to say go to the M's, go to Montreal, Monaco. There was 1 or 2 other M's that were quite good as well. Monaco, you just break the bank. It's a ridiculous place to have a racetrack. It's just insane, and it's all done by Saturday afternoon, isn't it? But it is an amazing location, amazing venue, and an amazing place to see a racing car, because they're so out of their environment that you just get a sense. It's shocking how quick they are, and yet it's the slowest they go by miles. I used to have this fantastic opportunity to go out on track. Everyone gets a tab art at Monaco. The media, generally speaking, don't go out on track so much. obviously the snappers are doing it, and there's one or two superstars who'll go out and watch the cars out there. But everybody gets a tap out at Monaco. I would go to Tabac, and you wouldn't be allowed to stand there for very long, but you could literally watch the cars coming towards you, and just for a moment your eyes would meet the drivers just for a fraction of a second, and then they flash past millimeters away from the, and it's not somewhere that people look at, but that was just an amazing privilege. That one's a good one to go to. And Spa is, everyone should go and camp at Spa. You'll come home with trench foot, pneumonia, you'll hate yourself, but it's an amazing experience because I don't think anyone gets a sense watching on television just how the elevation changes, and the forest, and the sense of being in it's a gorgeous part of the world anyway. In fact, I think the Walloon region and the Ardennes region of Belgium is gorgeous, and it's all about Flanders in that country, but I think it's absolutely amazing.
Yeah, that definitely struck me when I saw Spa first, the Ardennes forest and Radion and Eau Rouge. I mean, all these unbelievably famous turns and hills and parts of the track that you're just, when you see with your bare eyes, you're like, oh, this is incredible. So we will get back to Spa before the end of the podcast. We should talk about Hungary, I guess, first, guys. And I mean, it is definitely Groundhog Day at this point, but at least it's history this time for Red Bull, so it makes it a little bit more interesting. So a 7th win in a row for Verstappen, 9th of the season, and Red Bull's 12th consecutive win dating back to Abu Dhabi 2022. So this, of course, breaks the record of 11 straight wins set by McLaren with Senna and Prost back in 1988. Bernie, I guess this is a record that when it was set in 88, people thought it'll be a long, long time before this is broken. It was a long time, and I mean, what a team. Red Bull, unbelievable.
Yeah, and I think when you look at it, and credit to them, they've built a strong car. Max is driving it, really well. There's very few mistakes coming either in qualifying or the race, which just like, leading every lap of the race last weekend is so impressive and so hard to do in a multi-stop race, to always be in that position. You never need to stop behind the guy in P2. You can just lead it from beginning to end. It is impressive what they've achieved and what Max continues to achieve, because you've got to think that although we're saying, oh, it's easy, he's in the fastest car, he cannot let his concentration slip in a qualifying lap. And maybe we did see that a bit last weekend. He wasn't expecting Hamilton to be so close, so he didn't get the best lap in Q3. But to keep that level of concentration without the competition, with these guys creative, it is impressive to see him continuing to do it week on week. And the question is going to be, where does it stop? And short of a reliability failure or some really out there conditions, which again, I think Red Bull's pit wall are highly adapted to deal with, I just don't see where the competition, we closed and qualified this weekend, but I don't think we're closing in the race.
It's mad, isn't it, Declan? I mean, like that season from McLaren 35 years ago that we mentioned, historical in many senses, but I guess one thing it didn't achieve is winning every single race across the season. Are we getting to the point now where it's still a while off, but it's becoming a distinct possibility?
Just need to bring Jean-Louis Schlesser out of retirement, and maybe he can sort of harpoon Max Verstappen at a chicane somewhere, and maybe get a 1-2 for Ferrari at Monza. That'd be nice. I mean, it is hard to see how anyone can get to them. I mean, I think the point was well made that had Lewis got it off the line, or at least got through the second phase of his start properly, it wouldn't have made any difference. Because even though Hungaroring is not exactly the most inspiring and exciting racetrack on planet Earth with DRS these days, it means that the fastest car is going to eventually win. I mean, you talk about the law of unintended consequences, and I'm sure the power brokers at the head of F1, I'm sure it's all they ever think about is domination is not good for the game. It's not good for the brand, but it has existed since the dawn of motor racing. It has existed since the dawn of sport. And to imagine that it's not there, we're not going to have eras or epochs where, you've just got this level of domination, which for an extended period of time is unreasonable. And in some respects, Bernie Ecclestone did it, and I think again now the Drive to Survive generation as well have come in, and they have potentially unreasonable expectations. I'd always said Bernie sold the world a pup. He sold them this idea of Mansell versus Prost versus Senna, and they all hate each other, and it's amazing. It's all about the drivers. It's all about this incredible dynamic between them, and that was fascinating, absolutely fascinating. And through the years, it has been really fascinating to see, Schumacher against Hill, make a list, etc. But in reality, what happens is this is a team sport, and the best people will meet the best people. So you will eventually, the best drivers are always going to. So Adrian Newey has to meet Max Verstappen at some stage. That's just going to happen, So, and then inevitably they're going to dominate because they'll put it all together, and they'll put it together for an extended period of time. And then the power brokers, they're trying to figure out how to change it. So they come up with DRS, which everyone rails against, harumphs about for a while, and then kind of everyone's into it now, aren't they? There's so much strategy around it, and everyone's excited about technically how Red Bull have done a great job with it. And of course, it's just become part of what we understand Formula One is. So with DRS, it means that the quickest car is eventually going to end up at the front of the race, no matter where it starts, more or less. And that's the slight complication. That's the conundrum. When we've got this level of domination, it's almost guaranteed to continue. And the variables aren't in it. I suppose in the dawn of motor racing, the cars broke down a lot. People crashed, they got injured, they got killed, and then so you had those extra variables that thankfully aren't there anymore. But now, and I think the reliability is a major issue, really, because the cars just don't break down, and they will last, and they will get through. And as Bernie says, in strategy terms, on race weekend, they're so well honed, they're so battle hardened, and they're so clever, and they're just consistently clever. Consistency is the name of the game. So eventually, I mean, this too will end, like the pandemic, like Red Bull's domination. I mean, what the record he's going for now is Vettel's 9 in a row, isn't it? That's the next one. But I mean, Ascari won every race in 52 and 53. We saw the domination of Fangio through the 50s. When Jim Clark did 63, everyone got, oh my God, this is ridiculous. I mean, keep it going into the 70s. The Lauda domination at Ferrari wasn't as, he didn't win as many consecutive Grand Prix because they broke down back then, but it amounted to more or less the same thing. How come Ferrari don't win every race is what they said. And maybe we can talk about that again later as well, because they're really dropping the ball at the moment. But fundamentally, this is going to happen. It happened with Schumacher. It happened with Hamilton. It happened, with Vettel, and it'll happen with Verstappen for a while, and then it'll be someone else.
Yeah, I guess it does come in peaks and troughs, really. Like, if you look at the constructor standings at the moment, the top five: McLaren 87 points, Ferrari in fourth on 167, Aston Martin third 184, 223 points for Mercedes in second, but 452 points. Red Bull have the lead with those 11 wins and 17 podiums, and then Verstappen's lead in the driver standings, 281 points ahead of Perez, 171, way ahead of Perez, 110 points out in the lead, and Alonso in third on 139, with Hamilton and Russell in fourth and fifth. Like, Bernie, as Declan says there, like, is it getting to a point now where, well, I'm sure it is at the point, but Formula One higher ups will be having these meetings? I guess Red Bull domination isn't great for the sport as a spectacle.
Yeah, it's definitely not great, 100%. And I think particularly for the newer fans, maybe it's not great because you want to see people fighting for P1. I think those of us that have historically watched are maybe, much more interested in the midfield battle, and definitely we have a very exciting midfield battle. And as much as we try to sell the qualifying last weekend, it was a shock for Hamilton to be on pole. As much as we try and sell that as closing the gap, then you see the gap at the end of the race and you realise actually the gap is still pretty massive to Red Bull. It is a problem, and I think a bigger problem maybe is that how long term the rules are locked in for, how long ahead. We're already talking about rules. We're talking about regulations in 2026. That's new engine regs coming. That's already 2 more full seasons away. That, I think, will shake up naturally the order because we have this big change in engines. So do we just wait for gradually the others to catch up between now and then? That's the question mark, and that's what the powers that be are going to have to decide if, as we get to the end of this year, is naturally the development of those other cars, which we do see coming and we do see the gap closing slowly. Is that going to be enough? And, fundamentally, are they going to wait for this sliding scale of aero development to play out to see the fruition of, if limited aero development with Red Bull, is it going to change the scales quickly enough? Or does that scale need to be harsher? Does it need to be more than the 5% or whatever it is between teams? So I think they sort of need to almost not react too quickly and see their own regulation play fully out in terms of what's going to happen in aero development.
I I guess, and from a Red Bull perspective, and those questions, there's so many questions there that I guess Red Bull and Formula One and everyone else are going to be trying to answer over the next while. We always talk about Verstappen, but I guess you forget almost that there is Checo is there in the background trying his best to race with one of the greatest drivers, certainly of modern times. Bernie, you know Checo very well, obviously, but I mean, per qualifying in 9th in Hungary, but then use the offset strategy, starts on the hard tires. Most of the front runners are on the mediums at the weekend just gone, and does well, climbs up the leaderboard and has that battle with Norris then for second and third. It's a difficult position for Checo, isn't it, at the moment when you're racing someone like Verstappen, and I guess you're getting compared to him week in, week out.
It definitely is. Like, he's not, in his previous teams, his previous vices, he was maybe the one scoring the most points. So he's not been so much in this position until he's joined Red Bull. And obviously he's fully expected that going into that Red Bull seat. That was always a number 2 driver seat, regardless of how good the number 2 driver is. I'm a big fan of Checo, worked with him a lot, as you say. I was surprised how long it's taken him to turn around the, pretty poor results that we've had so far this year. To be trailing Verstappen by, like you said, 110 points at this point in the season's pretty poor from a car that is second best. It's not like Verstappen has the second best car and he's over racing it. That car deserves to be P1 and P2 on the podium every week. And the P1 in Hungary, the shunt lap one, I just thought, this is going to be another weekend from hell. How do you turn it around? And he did what he needed to do in qualifying. He got rid of the Q1 and the Q2 sessions. Maybe not the best Q3, but he just needed to progress through those sessions with no mistakes. Especially as we had the different qualifying last weekend. And he done that well, and then he raced well. Hungary is difficult to overtake, so I'm even surprised at some of the progress that was made through that race. So he just needs to keep that going forward if we can into Spa this weekend. He enjoys Spa, I think, as a track. It's going to be an interesting one for him. And even last week, a lot of pressure with the Ricciardo move. Ricciardo moving into the AlphaTauri seat. As much as you come out in the press and you say, "Oh, I'm not worried about that. I'm not conscious about that." Like, why did they do that at that point in the year? Is it to say give Ricciardo a few races before the shutdown, then make some big decisions? That is a lot of pressure on your back when someone as good as Ricciardo was getting in the AlphaTauri seat that weekend. So I think he did all right last weekend, but let's see what this weekend brings.
Got quite pointed, didn't it, Declan? Like the timing of that move, as Bernie says, bringing Daniel Ricciardo back in, and I think Lewis Hamilton even during the week was taking an aim, a little bit of an aim. Of course, it's low hanging fruit when it's Mercedes versus Red Bull, but that decision to replace Nick de Vries with Ricciardo at AlphaTauri, just 10 races into his maiden F1 season, Nick de Vries, as we spoke about in the last podcast, and Hamilton had said, I was definitely surprised to see the decision to sack Nick. He's such a talented young man, such a nice guy as well, so I think the future's still bright for him. Like, did it feel like a timely
I don't think. Well, funnily enough, generally you don't get as long to prove yourself in Formula One these days compared to days of yore, because they come in pretty much fully formed, or at least they ought to. Pace-wise, they shouldn't be that far away, and they shouldn't be consistent. So, I mean, it's tough for de Vries. I mean, talented racing driver, as you say, but wasn't performing. There was a better option. That it was Daniel Ricciardo was extraordinary. And does he really want to go back to Red Bull? I mean, it's a poison chalice, as Bernie has pointed out there. Sergio Perez is having to come to terms with the fact that he is the established number 2 driver, and no Formula One driver has ever arrived at the top level without thinking of themselves as at least the very best in their team. And Ricciardo, he's still got a bit of PTSD from his McLaren time, hasn't he? And it's funny how it's drivers suit different automobiles at different times in their career. They can have these little dips, which is because the car isn't suiting them. Might be a bit of a Russell situation at Mercedes going on there. I'm not sure what the situation is for Perez, but whether it's just the automobile isn't suiting him, whether it's the environment, whether he's just had couple of seasons now have not been the main man, and he's lost a little bit of his mojo because of it. Only he really knows that for absolute certainty. But absolutely, yeah, you can be sure that there's a lot of politics around these decisions. For Ricciardo, does he really want that though? I mean, does he really, really want to be going up against Max Verstappen? Does he believe he can beat him? Would he? I don't know.
Yeah, it's a bit of a poison chalice for whatever driver, because obviously Checo's a top driver as well, as is Ricardo. Whoever takes that position is going to be up against it, I'd imagine, week in, week out. We did mention Lewis Hamilton, and I guess we should pay credence to the fact that he had his 104th pole position. He said on Saturday after that qualification that it felt like his first after such a drought. Saudi Arabia 2021, Bernie was his last pole position. And look, the race didn't go to plan, as you say, but I guess he still deserves credit for banging out poles in that car, because, as he says, he apologizes to his team afterwards, but he's been critical, I guess, of the car over the year, so he's still able to pull out these results.
Yeah, I think he's pushing the team very hard. I think it was interesting. I spoke to someone, I can't remember over the weekend, but Lewis has changed a little bit his attitude in his video comms. He's starting to thank the team a bit for their good pit stop, or for the work they've put in, or the effort, or thank the factory. So I think we are seeing someone who's trying to get the team behind him and trying to push it forward, trying to push the development. The qualifying lap was impressive. I think there was some comment afterwards that said it was the first time he tried to go flat through the high speed section, and he wasn't sure he could do it, but he figured Q3 run 2 was the time to give it a go. And that's a different kind of bravery to definitely what I'm capable of saying, this is your one lap, literally live on TV in front of everybody, all or nothing. Is the grip going to hold? And that's how I got the pole lap. And and I remember watching it and thinking he had a little wiggle through turn 13, I think it was, second last corner. You just sort of thought maybe he lost it there, maybe that was enough, and still to get it on pole. That is, bravery and confidence, that I don't possess. And that isn't, to me, what an F1 driver really epitomizes. You see that time and time again from the guys that are really good, and it's almost like not that they don't care about their own safety, but it's just like, I'm going to prepare to take this risk that I know if someone else doesn't take it, I'm going to benefit from. And it's great to see that fight within Lewis. And it will, to get that pole, and we say the race was then difficult afterwards, that will invigorate the team behind him so much, because that gap, has been closed. Yes, one event, yes, one specific set of circumstances, but that gap for that weekend was closed. And that is the bit that they're going to, really latch on to and really drive them forward in terms of development. So it's going to be really interesting to see, and we've talked a few times about it, it seems that the higher fuel, their race pace really suffers, I think, compared to their qualifying pace. They're not the only team that I think suffer that. So can they get on top of whatever their current race issue is, let's say, in order to, his start was terrible compared to Max's. If you compare it to Max and Norris, I think it was the week before, almost the tables turned. So can they get on top of those issues to really drive the race forward?
Before we take a quick break, we should mention Declan, George Russell's drive, because while we're on the subject of Mercedes, it was a poor qualifying for Russell, 18th, some strategy issues there as well. He was sent out into traffic at the end of Q1.
It wasn't entirely on him, but then he was letting them all past him, wasn't he?
This is it.
They have this gentleman's agreement. I mean, come on. I mean, it's, I don't understand that. I mean, their lap into their lap should be almost as busy, and you just got to get your elbows out of it, don't you?
Yeah. Get them greasy, 100%. And the race itself, it was a team effort, to be fair. And it's not a track where you expect to see too much in the line of overtaking, but Russell certainly. Probably the drive of the day. I mean, ends up in 8th behind the two Ferraris, overtakes Sainz, and then, of course, with a penalty for Leclerc, ends up 6th. So an amazing turnaround for George Russell, Declan.
Yeah, clean run. Kept his head together. Didn't let the head drop. And like, midfield is nuts these days, isn't it? I mean, there's so much stuff going on. Blue flags, cars running offline, picking up rubber. They can lose unbelievable amounts of time there. People are running different strategies. So to thread your way through that and to keep your head, from stint to stint, and put it all together is very impressive by Russell. Yeah, he needs something, doesn't he? He needs a little bit of a run here. It looks like, I mean, maybe, and like, it was interesting to hear Bernie say that Lewis has been all nice to the team now. maybe because he kind of owns the team a little bit in the last few weeks, and that now he can get down to motivating them rather than berating them for the fact that he's not actually ahead of George Russell. Maybe if he gets a little bit of a run like that, he owns it a bit like Max owns his team, and then. But it was a super job by Russell. Yeah, he's definitely, and he's pushing. He's the right guy to be there with Hamilton at the moment. There's just a tiny little bit of a frisson between them, but it seems to be a good team environment.
Certainly the drive of the day for a lot of people. Stick with us, guys. We're going to take a very short break on episode 7 of the F1 Pod on Off the Ball in the F1 Pod podcast feed and the Off the Ball Daily podcast feed. We'll be back in just a second with Bernie Collins and Declan Quigley. All right, you're very welcome back to episode 7 of the F1 Pod on Off the Ball, weekly between now and the end of the season, after race weeks, of course, live on Wednesdays in the F1 Pod podcast feed and the Off the Ball Daily podcast feed as well. Keep your questions coming in to myself on Twitter at Shane Hannon01. We have Bernie Collins, the F1 pundit and former head of race strategy with the Aston Martin Formula One team, and Declan Quigley, the motorsport journalist and broadcaster. We were discussing George Russell there just before the ad break. We should mention, I guess, the other young British driver that everyone likes to focus on is Lando Norris, Bernie, and I guess from McLaren's perspective, things are looking okay at the moment. Piastri and himself had a little bit of a ding dong and a little bit of controversy over the radio, got a bit tetchy in terms of priority at the pit stops, but ultimately Norris pulls away and has a brilliant race in second.
Yeah, I think so, and I think that's something they'll sit down and review afterwards. But just looking at the Norris thing first, second week in a row on a podium, we were shocked at their pace at the start of the year. And now equally as shocked with the turnaround, really, much more back to the position that we would have expected them to start the year in. Fantastic for Norris to get the double podium. Fantastic that McLaren have been fit to get on top of whatever the issue they had was and find the pace. Piastri's done a fantastic job, maybe more so at Silverstone than this weekend. But in this weekend, it's interesting the team play, how they called the pit stops. I don't necessarily think they were expecting Norris to have undercut Piastri. I think they're trying to protect both of the positions from Hamilton and at a poor stop, so it wasn't needed anyway. But over the next 2 stints, Norris's pace showed that the decision, whether accidental or on purpose, was the correct one. It was correct to have the drivers in that order. Piastri in those final 2 stints was just not fit to match Norris's pace for whatever reason. We don't fully understand that. And I think they'll go back and they'll review why the pace was different for a start, so from a driver learning point of view. And secondly, what they should have done in that situation, or how they're going to explain that to Piastri on the radio going forward. Because from an absolute team's point of view, there's a lot of points in that, it was a correct decision. It's correct that Norris was ahead. Otherwise, you're letting both guys fall back.
Is Piastri already cooked? I mean, he came in with a huge reputation, didn't he? And in some ways, that didn't suit him, did it? It wasn't good for a rookie to have this, big sort of tug of love thing going on with Alpine. And he came up with such a massive reputation for having won absolutely everything in the junior formula. And there aren't too many drivers who come in with that record in the last few years. So I mean, the assumption was he was going to be an absolute A-lister. Verstappen, Hamilton, that kind of level, and he's already established number 2. Now he's right there. He definitely. I mean, we're not talking Nick de Vries here. I mean, he's absolutely right there, and that podium's coming for sure. So, but is he already slightly damaged goods? Does he look to the if you're Ferrari or Red Bull or anyone? I mean, if you're looking to build your team around a driver, is he going to be the man, or is he already a little bit secondhand looking? That's the question.
I don't know, I need to go through and review a bit more of the piece, but Silverstone, he was very, very close to Norris, both in qualifying and the race. And, all drivers have their track that they're not so preferred for. We don't know if there's any setup thing different on the car or anything that going forward they'll improve. It's still his first season, so Hungary is a tough track. So to be a little bit off Norris in Hungary, I don't think they're going to be really selling that too bad. Like, let's see how it goes over the next, the Spa is going to be an interesting one again, because he should know that track. Every driver knows Spa very well. So it'll be interesting to see how that comes out, maybe.
The one team that'll be completely disappointed, and again, it feels like Groundhog Day guys having this conversation, the Tifosi we mentioned, Ferrari. it's hard to know where to start with these guys, because Charles Leclerc, especially, I mean, his race, they had that opening pit stop, drops him behind Carlos Sainz, who had only started in 11th. So Charles Leclerc, I mean, ultimately Leclerc 7th, Sainz is 8th. They're 70 seconds behind Max Verstappen, so that'll show the gap between these two teams at the moment. But Declan, it's hard to find anything positive to say about Ferrari at the minute, isn't it?
Yeah, no consistency, and they don't seem to know where they are. And I'm sure Bernie can talk about their operationally, where they don't seem very together, but fundamentally they just don't have a jam jar, do they? Yeah, the car, and that's so at least they don't have them for a whole weekend, and it's just coming and going. And yeah, you talk about that pole lap and what it's done for Mercedes, and what a motivational boost. I mean, they need something to come out of the woodwork a little bit that will just give them a little bit of a G up. That oughtn't to matter. I mean, they should have, with the amount of resource these teams have, the amount of money, and like the amount of sort of science and engineering that goes into this, almost the entire season should be sort of mapped out in front of them. They should have a fair idea of where they are quite quickly, and then they'll develop from that. But it doesn't seem to be like that, do they? It's still a human endeavor. And Ferrari, not so good.
It is a human endeavor, Bernie, as Declan says, and there was comments this week from Paul Stoddart, the former F1 team principal, and he was saying Ferrari made a terrible mistake in sacking Mattia Binotto last year. Said they need him back. They could be caught by McLaren in the Constructors' Championship as well if they keep on this form. He was saying, Stoddart, he says he doesn't blame Fred Vasseur, but feels Ferrari made an error in not making, certainly at least, the transition smoother. Does he have a point that maybe the Binotto exit was a turning point in the wrong direction?
It's really difficult to know. I think that maybe it's very hard to know totally the structure of a team internally. We often blame, I don't necessarily think that sacking Binotto was the right thing, or however it was phrased, or bringing in Fred, that either of us going to turn it around. But I don't think within 10, 11 races, someone at that level in a team is making a difference definitely not to direct car performance. I think to make a difference to car performance, to like their ultimate speed in qualifying, that definitely takes more time. And we have seen some glimmers of hope from some of the decisions they make over a race weekend, some of the decisions that they make, explain it before the Canada strategy decision, for example. We have seen some indications of a strong team in the background. It's just, like Declan says, the consistency. Week on week, they're not making the Canada pit stops decisions. It's every so often it happens, and then it doesn't happen for a week, and then we get a bad week, whatever. So it's can over time. And I sort of think you need to give someone in that position a year. I don't think you're going to see the realization of that, next year, really, whatever. It's a bit like thinking of it totally different. If we thought at the start of the year, Aston's strong performance coming online at the same time as their new factory is totally unrelated to the new factory, because you've not seen the effect of that sink through the team yet. So I don't think, from my position, I know enough about the management structure within that team to comment, is one better than the other, or was one a mistake, and should they revert it? Definitely now they shouldn't revert it, because they just seem to continuously cause themselves chaos they don't need. And they just need to give the guys in the team the best resource they can to get that car to the best position, and let someone in the factory focus on the other stuff they need to do.
It's remarkable the way the DNA of a team just sort of lasts for, decade after decade. I mean, with the exception of the Lauda years, sort of kicked off by Montezemolo, and then into the Schumacher years with Jean Todt at the head of, that cabal of Rory Byrne and Ross Brawn. I mean, and Michael Schumacher, they put the consistency into it, but it just hasn't existed since. And it really is extraordinary, and there has been a bit of a turnover in management, and it's got to. Again, you're absolutely right. We're looking from the outside in. We don't really know what's happening day to day, and you do have to see it across a longer period of time. And he does need a bit of a bit longer to get his head around it and put his own stamp on the management structure. But if there isn't a head there, then everybody starts shouting at each other underneath that. Everybody's trying to sort of fight to try and retain their little piece of the pile. So yeah, it's just remarkable. And like, it's a shame because it's such a big brand, and I always hated this obsession with Ferrari to the exclusion of all other teams. I don't think it's right, but it's true that that this particular sporting series does actually benefit when Ferrari are going well, up to the point where they dominate for about 4 or 5 years and kill the whole thing, which happened.
It just struck me there as well when we're talking. Granted, a lot of negative stories, but the Nick de Vries exit, Bernie. There was comments during the week from David Coulthard where he's talking about Logan Sargent, and he was saying he is at risk of being axed by Williams at the end of the year if he doesn't pick up. So Sargent and de Vries were the only two drivers not to pick up a single point in F1 this season, and obviously this is where I guess the team strategies come in and the workings behind the scene. Logan Sargent obviously brings in money to the team, so
he'll be there.
Well, this is it. Like, is that the only thing that matters? I guess, Bernie, for a team at that end of the grid, that if you're bringing in money, results, while important, don't matter as much.
It's difficult, and there's almost two aspects in the team. So if you think of sat on the pit wall, you've got the engineering aspect of the team that are interested in getting, let's talk about the McLaren example again, the fastest driver to the best position at the end of the race, and disregarding the other. If that was Norris and Piastri, paid and unpaid driver, should the team on the pit wall have done the same thing? 100%. They should have got the best points they can for that team, because the prize money at the end of the year is worth more potentially than some of the paid drivers bring. The management structure further up have probably got a more delicate balance to strike. But I imagine there's a lot of paid for drivers out there looking for seats. But I think that in all instances, almost, you need to back your horse at the start of the year and stick with that horse through the year. Be that de Vries, be that Sargent, be that Fred, whoever it is, and say, we've got a plan to get us to the end of the year. Are we seeing improvements? Are we seeing marks in the right direction? And to sort of say, they're the two drivers that haven't scored any points. In any other season, if the midfield wasn't so close, we'd have loads of drivers on 0 points. And for the whole year, we'd have loads of teams on 0 points potentially. So it's really interesting that this has become the marker of whether a driver is good or not, because to get the difference in that P10 and P11 is often so small, and often based on strategy decisions or whatever, that it's not necessarily all the driving. So the team has so much more information than we have, be it their feedback, their progression, their time in the sim, all this other stuff. It was interesting with the de Vries aspect that, Red Bull or AlphaTauri were coming out and saying he's got 4 races left to show us his skill. Whereas I think James Foles has already come out on Sargent and said he's developing, a bit more positive, definitely more positive tones. And it's a bit like the good cop, bad cop, the football manager at the side hurling abuse versus the football manager hurling encouragement. It's a very dramatic difference, I think. So I don't know, maybe he's at risk for next year, but Williams aren't the sort, or haven't in the past necessarily got rid of them mid-season. So it's very interesting to see how that, how James Foles' outward expression of support, let's watch how that develops. And their pairings reasonably strong. I think they've done a lot better. The car's developing better. There's a lot of positivity from Williams.
Basically, if there's a queue of pay drivers down the street, here's your question. Is the guy we're going to bring in going to be definitely faster, definitely consistently faster, or bring a shed load more money? Because if they take Sargent out, presumably not all his money will last through to the end of the season. So the new guy has to have lots more money, and they need to be in money trouble. And I think it's probably not that. I don't know, but I'd imagine he's safe, as you say, till the end of the season. But you could probably do with a result or two between now and then.
Yeah, there are a couple of other teams that could certainly do with results or two. Like we've touched on Aston Martin a lot, but I guess Fernando Alonso qualifies 8th on the grid. Lance Stroll qualifies in a per 14th.
I think Stroll is secure though in his seat for next year.
Yeah, he should be. Like you'd imagine he'd be safe enough. And look, I guess from an Aston Martin perspective, those performances compared to the start of the season, like Bernie, you were involved with Aston Martin relatively recently as head of race strategy. That like they're third in the constructor standings. I guess a lot of that is because Ferrari still underperforming. and McLaren had such a bad start to the season as well. And then it was a 9-10 finish, so that Alonso headed the final point scorers the weekend. But I mean, it's nowhere near the levels that they were reaching at the start of the season.
Oh yeah, and doesn't show any signs of being either. I was sort of hopeful after Austria, Silverstone. Some people have brought upgrades. I thought Hungary, very different track. Maybe we'll get some of that performance back. Let's see how it goes for Aston. It didn't. None of the last 3 races have shown me any major errors from a strategy side or a qualifying side, or we don't hear the drivers complaining of like specific setup issue or tire issue, whatever it is. So where is all that pace gone? Now, is it just the others are improving more? It's been big steps, it has been big steps for McLaren, but it's very hard for us on the outside to relatively know the steps that others are taking as well. Some people are blaming the new tyres that we got in from Silverstone, but I think the downfall happened before that. So I don't think it's due to the tyre compound change that Pirelli have brought. But we've had many years, many of the years that we were the Force India team where we didn't necessarily roll out with a strong car. We gained points over others making mistakes in the early races, and we were fit to get some good points on the board early on. And I think that appears to be currently the case with Aston, where other teams haven't had their setup right or their development right or the car fully together and have been lagging in the first few races, for want of a better word, and are now on the catch-up game. And that's a pity, really, because I was really quite excited to see what Aston could do. I believe they have a strong race team there, so I was excited to see with a good car what they could do. But it is going to be a case now of holding on where they can, it looked like last week, get those 3 points for P9 and P10 just so you're not losing massive amounts to the McLaren. But it's going to be interesting battle for P2 at the end of the year. If it keeps going, I think Aston are going to fall away, and then you can see McLaren coming all the way through. So can they make it all the way to the P2 slot is a big question, really.
100%. Yeah, those questions to be answered for Aston Martin. You'd imagine over the next few races. The other teams we didn't really get to. Alfa Romeo, Zhou Guanyu, bit of surprise, third in the grid in qualifying, and Valtteri Bottas qualifying in second, but they found it a little bit tougher in the race. Bottas eventually gets 11th. Zhou is back in 16th. He has that first corner shunt that leads to that one, and then I guess Alpine just had a bit of a disaster on the first corner. So there are a couple of the teams we didn't really get to touch on massively. We should, before we finish, guys, mention the Spa Grand Prix, the Belgian Grand Prix, and I guess get the predictions. Albeit it's a tough enough race to predict because of the rain, maybe, and hopefully we can see some changes to the podium. Verstappen won there last year ahead of Perez, 17 seconds ahead of Perez, with Carlos Sainz in third. You had Russell fourth, Alonso fifth. Declan, I might start with you. How do you see this one playing out? You'll get no prizes.
What, behind Verstappen?
Yeah, I was gonna say.
Yeah.
If you say Max first, I'll not blame you.
Well, last time I was on, I predicted Alonso in the wet at Silverstone. So how did that work out?
There you go. Yeah.
So, oh my God, predictions. Who's behind him?
I'll take note of these predictions as well. I'm gonna write them down on my phone like the last time, just so I can. We can forget about them if we're all wrong, but if one of us gets it dramatically right, we can bring it back up.
Well, McLaren are flying, so that's boring as well. So who's going to come? What about Lewis? I think he's the arc is in the right direction.
Lewis is a second place behind Max.
Yeah.
Right, we'll go with that. Yeah, it's as good as a win, I guess. A second place at the moment, isn't it?
Class B, yeah, win Class B.
Yeah. And any surprises to finish out your podium, Declan?
Ferrari. They'll probably do something extraordinary just after slating them for the last.
Yeah, commentator's curse.
Yeah.
Bernie, how do you see it?
It's hard to imagine that Verstappen's not going to win, but I'm going to just guess that he's not. Just something. Spa can always throw up something a bit out there. It's a sprint weekend as well, so let's see. So I'm just going to say Checo's going to win. And then I'm going to put in Norris because I thought McLaren looked strong.
Yeah.
And then probably Hamilton.
Hamilton in third. So
what did I say last week? Do you have my last? What did I write down?
Did we predict? I'm not sure if we predicted it because it was a couple of weeks out. I can't remember.
Oh, right.
But I'll have to keep note of these ones. That's it. So yeah, I guess if Max isn't on the podium, something has happened to his car. He's been knocked out of the race. You'd imagine. I'm going to go.
Well, Spa's one of those ones where anything can happen because it's looking wet some of the weekend.
Yeah, this is it. It's
I
one
was
of those.
there in '98. You've never seen such carnage. They need a rubber nose cone for Zhou Guan Yu. That'd solve our prediction
Yeah,
competition.
absolutely.
Make it interesting.
I might go for. I'm gonna say Max is gonna win. Be really, really boring, and I'm gonna go Russell in second. I think Russell likes it at Spa, and who's the surprise in third? There's no real surprises. I guess Lando Norris isn't a surprise anymore. Carlos Sainz. We'll go Carlos Sainz in third. It's tough to predict. I guess it's probably one of the toughest races to predict. Is it, Bernie? Do you find?
It can be because it can throw up a lot, and it's a very short number of laps. It's often a multi-stop race, and it's one of those races where, particularly, which might be relevant this weekend, you've got those changing conditions potentially, and it's one of those places where it's a 7K lap. What is happening in the pit lane is not what's happening at turn 5 or 6. So you can be getting one set of information from the driver and one set of information from your eyes, and to try and collate the two, often the radar is totally wrong because you're in the middle of the forest and it's just chaos. And the most interesting thing from making those decisions in inter wet conditions is often if you miss the lap, it's a long lap to correct it. So if you're one lap too slow and putting on an inter wet, you've got a very slow lap to get in and fix it. So making those decisions at the right time almost becomes more important than a long lap. And a very short lap like Austria, very quickly you correct the decision and you move on with your life. Whereas, I've had many examples in Spa where it feels like forever to get it back around again. The same's true in qualifying in terms of positioning, or we talked a little bit about Russell last weekend being in the wrong position on track for the qualifying session. If that happens this weekend, it's really detrimental because you've got a long time to correct it. If you leave the garage too late, it's a long battle to get to the start finish line.
Yeah.
Does that mean you're more likely to make the change if it's going to be a change to a different?
I think you almost have to preempt it, particularly if you go in the dry to the inter direction. You almost have to preempt it because it's a 1:44 lap, I think, when it's dry. So you're talking over 2 minutes in the inter conditions. So you need to sort of be that minute ahead of the conditions or the issue that's about to arise. Not so much going into the dry because that tends to happen much more gradually, but definitely that, dry to wet or inter conditions. And we know that when it rains heavily there, as you can tell yourself from your camping experiences, but you do need to be just a little bit more ahead of the game, I think, in Spa.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, it's
so those that aren't paralyzed by indecision are the ones that
So you might get a good read on the pit walls this weekend.
Yeah, you'll see the confusion on some of the faces. It's always a race to look forward to, guys. Bernie and Declan, thanks a million for your time as always.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Great stuff. Bernie Collins there, the F1 pundit and former head of race strategy with the Aston Martin team, and Declan Quigley, motorsport journalist and broadcaster. That is episode 7 of the F1 pod and Off the Ball in the books. We will be back next week for episode 8, of course, to recap on Spa and all the action. There will be a slight break then, of course, for the summer and the F1 hiatus that comes, but we will be back then with episode 8 of the F1 pod here and Off the Ball next week. Good luck.
The F1 pod on Off the Ball with Chicago Town Pizza. Formula One? Yeah, we go to town on it.